Welcome, everyone, to episode 12 of the Argument Clinic podcast. My name is Martin, and my lovely co-host's name is
Lawrence.
We are two debate coaches in Lincoln Douglas debate, and we are the host of the Argument Clinic podcast, which is a podcast devoted to understanding the fundamentals of Lincoln Douglas debate. And the best thing about our podcast is that it is open and listenable regardless of your skill level, whether you're a seasoned veteran of the tournament scene or whether you're going to your very first tournament or have never gone to a tournament. The Argument Clinic podcast is the podcast for you. We help people who are just learning, that just want to be good at debate, people who want to teach other people to be good at debate. All of those things available on the Argument Clinic podcast. We are sponsored by Victory Briefs. That is a debate camp and website that Lawrence has just finished from commanding a large number of sessions of students at. How is that, Lawrence?
Pretty tiring, but I already kind of miss it.
Our last episode was a bunch of stories from that camp experience. So feel free to go to what's the name of the website? Victorybriefs.com?
Yeah, that is one of the websites.
Yeah, so go to victorbriefs.com if you're at all interested. It's also a great debate news site and a source for articles and various resources and everything like that. And they publish a brief service, which is also very useful for debaters coming through the season. So if you're new, if this is the first time on the Argument Clinic podcast, welcome. We are glad to have new listeners. If you are new to Lincoln Douglas Debate Source, sort of don't know what it is, that's completely normal. This is an episode for novices and teaching novices. So if you don't know anything about Lincoln Douglas debate, or you just know a very little bit, or you want to teach people that are interested in learning more about Lincoln Douglas debate, then you've come to the right podcast. And this episode is going to be a great resource for you going forward. None of us really ever knew what we were getting into debate, but debate is a wonderful thing and will help walk you through the very first steps about it. Now, Lawrence, how excited are you, Lawrence, for this marvelous opportunity that we have to present all of the know-hows to all of the peoples across the world?
Well, I'm pretty excited for a few reasons. One is I taught the Novice Lab at Los Angeles Session 1 for 3 weeks. So I think I learned a lot about teaching novices at that session. Two, I think one of the most requested sort of just general comments and emails, not specific to the Argument Clinic, but just like in general by people is, when are you going to do novice episodes? Or like, I've just started doing debate. How can we help? So I think we're like, can someone help me? And I think that we're going to fulfill like a pretty strong demand there for, helping novices.
Okay, for some of our returning listeners, we have a segment here, which is what did you do last weekend, in case we're at a debate tournament or something like that. But we obviously haven't been at a debate tournament because it's the summer, and there are very few debate tournaments that happen then. Certainly none that have happened just recently. Now, Lawrence, I can tell you that over the summer, I went to one session of Victory Briefs and taught novices there, which was an absolute delight. Had a lab called the Stone Cold Killers. Shout out to any Stone Cold Killers out there. And then for the rest of the time, I kind of did another debate camp at my school, hung out, did some logistic stuff, look for an apartment, etc. Lawrence, what did you do over your summer?
Well, since our last episode, which was 6 weeks ago, I've done 6 weeks of camp. So, yeah.
Wow, excellent. So where are you in the vicinity of sleep, and how are your eyelids?
Pretty bad in terms of sleep. I need at least another full weekend to recover. I think I'll sleep about 48 hours this weekend.
Lawrence, did you take a look at the fabulous solar eclipse that happened yesterday?
I did. It was underwhelming, but also I was in Oklahoma, so it wasn't like directly above us.
Lawrence, the solar eclipse was absolutely the most underwhelming thing that I've experienced in a long time. So very, very much in agreement with you there. And if you have any hate mail or really, really liked the eclipse or really hated the eclipse, send an email to theargumentclinicpodcast@gmail.com if you have any questions or concerns about that as well. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into the meat and potatoes. This is a scholarship episode. We are teaching the basics of a novice curriculum. So for those of you that are novices, listen tight, and in the next couple sections, we're going to go over a bunch of real basic stuff for just getting into debate. Now, obviously, we have a bunch of other podcasts, and obviously, there's tons of good things to learn about debate. But in this podcast, Lawrence, what we're doing is we're going to give you a lot of the very basics, like what is a case, what is debate, how should you be thinking about debate and arguments, and hopefully that gives you a good foundation for things going forward. Now, Lawrence, what is the etymology of the word foundation?
I have no idea.
I thought you're supposed to be prepared for this podcast. Come on, Lawrence, how dare you?
Well,
You're a disgrace.
It's like 3 days after camp has ended. I'm still barely getting to classes on time.
So you're saying that if you were getting to classes on time, you would know the etymology of foundation?
I'd have more time to research it.
Do you think that foundations are found, like you like locate them?
It's a possibility.
Is it a type of nation where people are found?
Not currently, but the possibility certainly remains.
The possibilities are endless. So for you new listeners, we like to do a lot of riffing, and jokes as well. So a lot of people hopefully listen just for the just enormously high quality of humor on the podcast and all of my dad jokes and etymology questions for Lawrence, which could of course happen at any time.
By the way, I wouldn't listen just for our jokes. They're pretty bad.
I 100% would do that. So when we get back from our first break, we'll talk about what is debate. So you want to debate, how should you do it? All right, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to get into what is debate in sort of a very general sense. Now, I think that when a lot of people think about debate, they the image that's in the public eye is one that is, there are a couple of people, they're standing on the stage in front of like many other people, and they are having a debate about the issues of their day. Now, the type of debate that we do, Lawrence, is a little different from that types of debate in a number of respects. We do, of course, high school academic debate. So this is a run as much as a team. It is, competitive across the country, competitive high school leagues of competition, as well as, of course, entire national circuits devoted to the thing. So how is debate, in your opinion, Lawrence, different from the way that it is presented to us in media, as well as sort of in the public eye? When people think of debate, how is academic debate different from that?
Well, I think there are probably broadly three different types of debate that we would see. The first is like, debating with your parents, where you just like argue with them and yell at them and like, stop debating with me, child. I'm the mom, you have to listen to what I say. And I think the second sort of one is like debates that you might have in school or in classrooms. So like in your English or your history classes, like small, debates like that. And finally, like televised debates, like the presidential debates from this last election, or, like academics debating on stage, like you just mentioned. And I think it's a bit different from all of those in a few respects. So it's a bit different from arguing with your parents because one, there's not a huge power gap between you two. It's not, you don't get to usually argue with your mom, but the person you're arguing with, you actually can argue with them without getting yelled at usually. And because there are formal rules, which we'll talk about here in a second. I think it's a bit different from most classroom debates, because classroom debates tend to deviate from the topic a lot. Like there's just like this broad topic, and then people will just go down this rabbit hole and they like talk about random things, and there aren't really official rules about how to debate. Just anyone can jump in, and it's like giant teams against each other. And I think it's a bit different from academic debates, because competitive debates are really just trying to prove like a winner, and you're trying to like follow specific competition rules. Whereas academic debates seem to be much more like, just about information dissemination and just about like, like convincing people that you're correct, as opposed to like trying to win the game of debate.
So one of the things that you just said was that debate is a game. And
Yep.
so what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that debate is like any other competitive sport that you would do, or even non-sport. So like it's just like competitive, basketball, in the sense that like you're trying to win, and it's just like math counts, and that you're trying to win and beat the other teams to win.
So there's a winner and a loser.
Yes, there is.
Right.
And so that's, I think, the first significant difference between most classroom or academic debates, and especially debates with your parents, is that there is one winner, one loser in each of these debates. Like after that debate happens, the judge will vote for one person, and one person has to win.
Okay, awesome. So the the image that I have, so where do debates typically take place? Because normally, like when I have the image of all of those debates, they obviously happen in different settings. Like one happens at my house, one happens in a classroom in front of a bunch of other classmates and a teacher, and then the other one, academic debates, happen in front of huge crowds and they're posted on the internet. So, based on your experience in a high school academic debate, where do competitions happen? If I go into an academic debate, what is the sort of setting that I can expect for
Usually,
the debate?
just usually other classrooms, because you'll compete against other high schoolers, and you'll go to other people's schools and debate in their classrooms. Sometimes they'll run out of space and you might end up debating in a hallway, but generally a classroom.
How about I feel like a lot of people are intimidated also by the prospect of debate when they think of crowds. They think like, oh, I have to speak in order to debate in front of a huge crowd, kind of don't want to do that. So based on your experience in the majority of academic debates, crowds, yes, no?
No, I mean, I think debate trains you to be a better public speaker, which is one of the huge values of competitive debate, as opposed to
Of course.
academic, parental or just classroom debates. But competitive debate, I think, is mostly just viewed by one judge and at most a few observers. Like I don't think I ever had more than like 5 to 10 people observing any given round, and most of the times it was just the judge.
Exactly. Okay, so Lawrence has hit on one of the key points of debate from an academic standpoint, winner and loser. It's you against, in this case, one other person in front of someone whose job it is to determine whether you won or lost, and that's it. There's no huge crowd or anything. It takes place in a high school classroom, a lot more low key than the sort of general public image suggests. Now, Lawrence, how does Lincoln Douglas debate work from the perspective of what you're debating about? So you mentioned, for example, that in the classrooms debates that there's a lot of sort of deviation from topic, and there's a pretty broad mandate to talk about the sort of things that you want to talk about. So, but I gather that based on your earlier comment that's not true in Lincoln Douglas debate. How do people know what they're supposed to talk about? Do they just go into the room and like pick a side and pick the thing that they're going to talk about, or something else?
Yeah, so in competitive debate or Lincoln Douglas debate that we're talking about, we're usually assigned a topic beforehand, called a resolution. And we'll talk about this more later when we talk about specifically what is LD debate. But what is competitive debate? Well, competitive debate in general is governed by, or generally governed by, a topic that is assigned to you by a national organization, or maybe just your school or local league, and you debate that topic.
Okay, so there is a resolution that you were debating about, and you know that a long time in advance, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, we have known the September October resolution. Lincoln Douglas resolutions are 2 month resolutions. We learn about that a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah. And again, we'll get more into the specifically what is LD debate section. But yes, we do know the topic beforehand. We've known for about 2 weeks now.
Right. So you have time to prepare debates on a topic. So I'm going to give you a sort of a presentation about what could happen as far as an academic debate could be conducted. And I think this is what a lot of people also think when they think, what is academic debate? They think, oh, academic debate. So there's a resolution. I decide the side that I want to be. I go into the resolution and I say, who would like to challenge me? I represent the pro or the affirmative on this resolution, and I am going to sort of find someone who's negative. We like have a debate, and then we both go home. How is academic debate different from that?
Well, unlike most academic debates that people will have, so live televised debates between senators or just like actual professors debating each other, the reason it's competitive debate is because you are forced to take both sides of an issue, which means you have to switch sides. Or in one round or one debate that you might have at a tournament, you will have to debate for one side, and then the next round you'll have to debate for the other side. So unlike academic debates or classroom debates, or even the debates you have with your parents, you are forced to take both sides of an issue as opposed to just the one that you believe in.
Yeah, and I cannot overstate how important this is. So you are debating the affirmative and the negative an equal number of times in most cases, which means that it's not, the question is not who's right or which one do you think is right. The question is more like which one can you prove, which one you can justify. And Lawrence, I can tell you that academic debate is mostly about justification, right? It's mostly about what can you prove or what can you argue and win, rather than like who happens to be, on what side. The point is that you have to win when you're the affirmative and the negative. So you obviously have to do good things on both sides.
Yeah, and I think the final thing that makes competitive debate different from just any other debate you might have seen is that you are, unfortunately, or as a judge, fortunately, constrained to a limited amount of speech time. And we'll talk more about the specific speech time and ordering in a later section. But just know that competitive debate, specifically high school Lincoln Douglas competitive debate, is governed by specific speech times and orders that you have to adhere to. So in summation, I think the things that make debate or competitive debate different from all the other types of debate that people might be generally aware of is that you have a topic, is that there is a winner and a loser, that you have rules like speech times, you have to switch sides, and it's not really like a huge audience and stuff, and you generally don't yell at each other. It's very formal, very civil, and so that's why it's a lot different from the sort of debates that you might have seen online, like when they have like debate movies and it's just like people yelling at each other, or debates in television shows for like your class president and stuff. It's just nothing like that.
Did you ever see Rocket Science, by the way?
I don't think I have.
That's a quote unquote debate movie. It's
Yeah.
not about. It's basically not about debate at all.
Yeah, apparently there's a new movie called like Speech and Debate or something like that, and but it's about like the drama team. There's also like an episode of Community that I'm reminded of where they have the class president debate.
Wait, really?
Yeah, I mean,
can you link me that after the show? I legitimately want to watch that.
Oh yeah, it's mostly just them yelling at each other.
Shit.
It's pretty fun. All right, so I think that covers what is.
Do not learn about debate from the Community TV show. Instead, learn about it from us.
Yeah, or literally anyone else.
Literally anyone else.
TV show. Okay, so that is what is debate, and the differences between competitive debate, which is what we're talking about, and all the other types of debate, like family debates, classroom debates, and academic debates.
And so for this next section, this one is really important. What we're going to do here is we're going to kind of walk you through what is an argument and how do you make arguments. Debate is, of course, made up of arguments. You argue with someone else, and you have argument with them, not in the sort of not in the sort of like verbal clash sense, but more in the sort of like you and your opponent are having a disagreement about the resolution and how right it is. So you have to argue with them. So in this section, we're going to talk about arguments. How do you argue with somebody else? This is a very important section, and it's going to be the foundation for all of your debate education. And those of you who are looking to teach debate, this is a section that you can really pay attention to in terms of like how you would present material to novices and things and things like that. So so there are three main terms that we're going to that we're going to eventually talk about here, but we're not going to give you the terms first. What we're going to do is we're going to like explain the terms as we go through them. But the important thing is what you want to be thinking overall is the resolution. The resolution is a big question that you have to answer, Lawrence. And when you have to answer that question, you can do that in a number of ways. You have to be on topic. So if you want to debate someone, if you want to have a debate about a resolution, the number one thing that you have to do first is kind of establish what are the sorts of things that are important to talk about. So let's say, for example, Lawrence, that I had a resolution that said, let's say, how about the death penalty is immoral?
Yeah, sure.
Let's say I had a resolution, the death penalty is moral. So how, like on the very basic level, would I go about trying to answer that question? What are the things that I would need to know? What sort of things might tip my feelings in one way or another?
Yeah, so the first thing you'd have to know is like, what is the death penalty? I'm sure all of you are at least somewhat aware of what the death penalty is. But if you don't know what it is, it's going to be a bit difficult to support your side that you are defending in that debate round, since you might interpret the death penalty as a cool metal band, and you're just like, they're immoral. But that would not really be an argument for or against the resolution, as it's been stated. So I think after you establish sort of the general idea of what the resolution or what the topic is positing towards you, then you have to begin thinking of reasons to support your position and reasons against the resolution. And so when you begin thinking of those reasons against a position or for a position, you have to start thinking of arguments for and against those positions.
Okay, so that's a good point. Very first thing that you need to do to answer resolution before you even start making arguments about it. So this is not even about the arguments you're making yet, is you have to have definitions for terms. If you and your opponent are debating about a different thing, like if you're saying death penalty, and by death penalty you mean putting someone to death in an electric chair, and your opponent means like getting the last penalty in a hockey game or something like that. Not that that's called the death penalty, although I wouldn't know because I know nothing about sports. But if you're debating about something different from your opponent, then you're not really having a disagreement. You're not even really debating about the resolution and how right it is. You're just debating about something completely different. So once you've gotten that all out of the way, then you need to, as Lauren said, talk about what are the reasons to support a position. And I kind of want to ask you a much more general question, Lauren. So you mentioned that you have reasons to support the resolution. You have reasons against the resolution. Before we get into some of the specific reasons that you could offer, what would make a reason important? If you wanted to prove that the death penalty is immoral, how would you know that a reason for the death penalty being immoral was important or not? Like if you wanted to establish like let's say, for example, that I said like the death penalty causes lemurs to vacation in hickory trees in July. You would think like, well, so what, doesn't that strike you as a bit odd? Like what sort of reasons are important if you want to prove that the death penalty is moral versus immoral?
Well, so I think you need to establish the relevance of the argument to the topic that's at hand, and you need to establish why the implication or impact or sort of ultimate end of what the argument is trying to prove, or the conclusion of the argument, has some bearing in our decision making. So if, for example, the impact was.
So let's talk about this resolution. So this one says the death penalty is immoral. So
Yeah.
so correct me if I'm wrong, you would need to connect it to that thing.
Right. So you have to establish the relevance to the topic, which is a question of the morality of that particular action. So I forget what exactly your example was because it was so outlandish that my brain shut off upon hearing it.
Lemurs vacation in hickory trees in July. Come on,
yeah. So if you couldn't prove that lemurs vacationing in hickory trees in July was relevant in a moral sense, or had some bearing on whether or not the death penalty was or was not immoral, then it would be an argument that doesn't really matter. It wouldn't be relevant. We wouldn't care about it.
That's a good point. In order to prove a resolution, you have to actually, prove the resolution. It's the topic that you're set there to debate. So you want to prove that it's relevant to that question. So of course you need to prove that your points are relevant. So Lawrence, you already mentioned this. What do you call what do you call the relevance of an argument in academic debate?
Well, in competitive debate, I'm not sure if academics actually use this word, but we call it an impact, or the reason for why something matters.
And that's a visual metaphor, right? It's just like a meteor crashes into the earth and it leaves an impact. Maybe we should start calling it crater.
I reject that idea and hope you never propose it again.
Okay. How about we call it a crater?
Okay. Or, and hear me out, we can just stick with the word impact because we've been using that for a while, and I think it works pretty well.
Impact. Yeah, I mean, it's probably better than crater. That's not saying much. So yeah, the impact of a point, its relevance to the debate, because as the lemur example vividly proves, you can point out various facts all you want, but if those facts aren't relevant to your question, then they're not important at all, right? And so let's take this resolution. We have the death penalty is immoral, and of course we're not going to get in this podcast into what is morality. You can listen to some of our past episodes for that, but we're going to talk about instead, what if we change the resolution, Lawrence? What if it was, instead of the death penalty is immoral, what if it was the death penalty reduces crime? Not that that would ever be a resolution.
Well, that would suck as a resolution because there's probably only one side that's definitively correct about that. But if that were the case, then almost certainly the prior argument about lemurs vacationing in hickory trees would have zero relevance to the topic, unless there's any connection, which there is just not going to be any, between lemurs vacationing in hickory trees and crime. So if the topic is, you must prove that the death penalty reduces crime, and your argument is, but the death penalty causes lemurs vacation in hickory trees, well, that would be an argument that we would say has no impact or no relevance to the debate round, because it doesn't uphold or contradict the resolution or the topic that is being debated.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, obviously, the lemurs example is particularly bad in terms of that example is obviously awful and relevant under no resolutions, except if the resolution was death penalty causes lemurs to vacation in hickory trees in the month of July, which that would definitely topic committee, if you're listening, please do not use that as the resolution. So, however, we have this narrow resolution. It was the death penalty reduces crime. Let's say that that's the resolution. So if I said, hey, I am against the death penalty. I'm against the death penalty because it's unfair. I think it disproportionately targets African American people, for example. Let's say I said that. Now, on a broader resolution that said the death penalty is good or is bad as the resolution, obviously I could talk about whatever I want, and my fairness point would be directly relevant there. But correct me if I'm wrong, Lawrence. If the resolution is the death penalty increases or decreases crime, my sort of fairness point seems not to really even be an impact, right?
Yeah, because you really, haven't established an impact in terms of the topic that is being debated, but also because the type of reasoning for why you get to that conclusion doesn't really end up supporting what you want it to say in the end. So in order to really take a stance as to whether or not the death penalty increased or decreased crime, you need some sort of reasoning or evidence or logic or, studies or something to really back up either side of the debate.
But Lawrence, those things that you described, the processes of justifying a thing, that's not what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about why is a thing important, not like why is it accurate.
Right, which is the second part of an argument, because there's a distinction between the sort of why is it relevant and how do we justify it.
Okay, and that's a point that I really want to make sure that our listeners and novices and proxy novices, for those of you looking to learn how to teach novices, really understand. It's very important to distinguish between why something important versus why it is true. So, for example, for the hickory trees vacationing lemurs July thing, let's say that I had conclusive scientific evidence that, in fact, implementing the death penalty will cause the lemurs to vacation in the month of July. Let's say the science is airtight. That doesn't mean it matters. And vice versa. Let's say that I said, well, in order to prove that that the death penalty reduces crime, and I just said, well, it would be a really big impact. The death penalty would reduce all crime. There's literally no crime in a world with the death penalty. And obviously the objection there, obviously it's relevant, but it's also just flat wrong. But I want to make sure that our listeners fully understand. Sorry to correct you, Lawrence, but that there is a huge difference between why is a thing accurate and why does it matter. Why does it matter is called an impact. Okay. And I want to make sure that we all know impacts in terms of the resolution. Why does it matter to the resolution? And it's your burden to argue that your thing connects directly to that resolution. Now we know what matters now. What do we call, Lawrence, that thing that you were describing? If you want to prove something true, what is that called?
Well, we'd call that a warrant.
Warrant, as in like a warrant for your arrest. Like, it's the same etymology, right? It's the same origin of that word. It comes from law. I think.
As far as I know.
Yeah, so you probably have heard in all sorts of crime dramas like, warrant for your arrest. That is like, a legal document that allows the police to enter your home and search your premises and stuff, which they need to do in order to avoid the Fourth Amendment violations. Anyway, not important, but the word warrant means a justification. It means a reason, right, Lawrence? It's a reason why you're saying something is accurate.
Yeah. So if you use it in like the verb form, it's just like I warrant the accuracy of this report. It'd just be like I guarantee or justify or necessitate the the accuracy of this report. And if you use it as a noun, it can either just mean like the search warrant, or it can just mean to justify. Is like there is a justification for something.
Okay, so justifications, reasons, right? Proof, you could say. In debate, obviously, you have to prove your stuff. You can't just make up random things.
Yeah,
you have
support.
to. Yeah, you have to prove. You have to support your things. Now, Lawrence, there are different ways of proving different sorts of things. And before we get into those, I just want to make sure one last time that our listeners are vividly aware that you can support your stuff all you want, but if it doesn't matter, then it's not important. So ultimately, what we're doing is we're figuring out what matters in terms of the resolution, and then we are building support for those things afterwards. We figure out what's important, and then we prove it. We prove that that important thing is on our side of the debate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So different types of things you warrant in different ways. And before we get into that, though, so I mentioned earlier that there were going to be 3 different types of things. So we have the impact. We have, which is, why it matters, which I've said a bazillion times. We have the warrant, which is why it's true. And we're going to get into some more detail in a second. So you have your reasons for a thing. You have why that thing matters. There's another thing called a claim. Lawrence, what is a claim?
The thing.
So
you
be a little more specific?
You have the thing, the reason why that thing is true, and the impact, which is why that thing matters. So if we're describing everything in terms of things, it would be the thing. In a more not broad sense, a claim is just the initial statement that you were attempting to support with a warrant, and then explain why that initial statement is relevant with an impact.
Yeah, so basically, if I look at your warrant and I look at your impact, and then I were to just ask you, hey, summarize that in one sentence, that would be your claim, right?
Yeah.
It is your argument. If I said, what is your argument? Like all of it. That would be the claim, right?
But it'd be the claim, the warrant, and the impact all together. Missing any single one of these parts means that it's not actually just an argument. If it's a claim without a warrant and an impact, well, it's not an argument because you haven't supported or justified why anything you've said is correct. And if it's a claim and a warrant but no impact, well, we already talked about that, so who cares? And if it's a warrant and an impact, I actually don't know how that would look. That seems like pretty difficult to do, but I'm sure someone would manage to pull it off, and it also would not be an argument.
What, like the lack of a claim?
Yeah, if it just only had a warrant and an impact, I'm pretty sure the claim would just be implicit in there, and you could just figure it out. But
yeah, that's the thing. It's kind of difficult to leave out a claim. Like basically, all that a claim is, you're just saying, "Hey, I'm arguing about this," and they're like, "Okay." Because obviously the claim by itself carries no importance. The claim, you prove the claim with your impact, with your warrant. And then with your impact, you say why it's relevant, why that whole thing is relevant, right? But it's not like the claim really adds anything special. It's kind of an introduction. It lets the judge know what it is you're talking about. If you were to being talking to someone and someone is just and someone came up who wasn't part of the conversation and they were like, what are you talking about? Whatever answer you gave would be the claim. You're not talking about the reasons why you support it. You're not talking about why it matters. You're just saying, here, generally, this is what I'm talking about. So so we've sort of presented you in the reverse order of the way that you should present them in a debate. So now take that, flip it. When you're in an argument, what you do is you say your argument first. That's the claim. Then you say why it's accurate. That's the warrant. And then you say why that matters for the resolution, and that's the impact. And this mirrors, Lawrence, doesn't this mirror how you see people give speeches? Like oftentimes you see them like, hey, here's an introduction, here's their point, and then they sort of bring it home. Like, how is this tangibly connected to the audience? What matters? That's kind of how speeches work, right?
Right. It even not only mirrors speeches, but like a lot of your, English essays that you'll write, which is like every sentence needs to follow like the 5-sentence paragraph format, which is like thesis, 3 reasons for why that thesis is true, like summation statement that includes a reason for why that thesis of the paragraph is relevant. It's just a claim and a warrant and an impact. So like virtually all forms of communication that are designed to like attempt to persuade other people, be it speeches or persuasive essays, closely mirror this claim warrant impact model.
Wanna just give a quick shout out to all those English teachers out there, hardworking people. What is the phrase? Salt of the earth. Is that actually like a compliment? I think that might be an insult. You see, someone's the salt of the earth. What do you think?
Don't know.
Because like I always thought, like, on the one hand you're trying to say like the people are earthy and like they're like,
yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's like a biblical reference, and I think it's like talking about simple good people, because like I think Jesus uses it in like the Sermon on the Mount. He's just like, ye are the salt of the earth, or you all are the salt of the earth, or something like that.
Oh, hey, maybe like, but wasn't salt really rare back then? Hey, maybe he was saying like, you guys are gold, but instead like it just that's a phrase that just hasn't aged well because now salt is really common. Come to think of it. Oh well, whatever. Point is, shout out to English teachers, and shout out to people who have to take English classes in school, no longer have to do that. That's great for me. Although I always enjoyed English class. One quick note about English essays, the way that they relate to debate. I will say that if you're already good at English essays, writing debate cases will certainly be easier for you. But writing a debate case is different in a lot of ways from writing an English paper. And of course, we're going to get into that specifically. But don't think that just because you're not so good at writing English papers, that debate will be hard for you, or that writing a case will be necessarily super difficult. They are kind of different things. So if you're not that great at writing English papers, don't worry. But if you already are good at writing English papers, then you are well on your way. Okay, so Lawrence, is there anything that you would like to add on the claims, warrants, and impact stuff before we start talking about types of warrants? Because we obviously put that off a little bit.
Nope, I think we're good to move into that.
All right, excellent. So let's start talking about types of warrants. Now, there are 3 that we're going to get into, and obviously there are more that kind of actually exist, but these 3 are good ones to kind of understand and sort of categorize. And a lot of warrants really fall into these categories. And if you see someone present something like as a reason for something else, then usually it will fall into one of these 3 camps. And the key thing that I want you all to really understand, and the thing that I want you all to communicate to your novices, is that different kinds of warrants warrant different kinds of things. Like some things you can warrant in multiple ways, but some things you can really only warrant in one way. So, for example, Lawrence, you can warrant, the word warrant applies to everything. You can try to justify anything. So I'm going to give you an example of a really sort of easy argument to justify. So if you wanted to say, how do you prove that let's say that the Syrian economy is experiencing inflation? So let's say I wanted to prove that. What is like what is the main way I would have to go about proving that very specific claim?
Well, other than the fact that I don't really think Syria has a real economy at the moment. But in order to track inflation, you'd have to rely on studies or empirical studies conducted by expert economists in the field that would analyze the overall trend of money and the economy in Syria, who would then arrive at a conclusion that, in fact, inflation in Syria was increasing. But again, I have no idea how you would track that in the midst of a Syrian civil war.
So I sort of followed what you said, maybe like solid like 35%. So what I'm hearing from that is that you have studies and statistics.
Yes.
You would prove that claim with studies and statistics.
Yeah, that would prove that over time that there's been a general increases in prices and a decline in the purchasing power of money, which is
Wow,
the
look at
definition
Lawrence just showing off over here
of
with his econ words that I
yeah. So
don't know.
you would conduct a study to sort of prove that those two things were true.
Conduct a study, as in like various
Well,
people
sorry,
say the study for
other
you. You kind of
qualified
like
people.
wave like a wand around, and they sort of say their study in tune with your wand, like you would conduct it. Is that what you're saying?
Or qualified people would conduct a study that you would then cite after they publish it in a reputable journal or news science.
Qualified people in the sense that they've said something and then say that that only applies sometimes. Like
Qualified
they've qualified it, right?
qualified people is in their experts in their relevant fields.
Okay, so like in what fields exactly? Like, and by that I mean like, is it like the fields of Kansas,
The field
or
of
like
study that they are experts in.
right, like I know they're studying in the field, but like which field? Like is it like a cornfield?
A field being defined as a sort of relevant area of, study. So like, if they're an economist, that's their field, is the economy.
So like the whole field is just full of widgets.
No, but also I'm unsure as to how this has any relevance to the instruction of novices.
Well, you just went ham on those econ words that I didn't know, so I figured I would go ham on you on word choices. So basically, if you want to figure out something about the world, one way you can do that is just by having studies and statistics. If you want to figure out something about the real world, like obviously, if you want to figure out, how often do people pick up their phones when political people call them or something like that. Let's say you wanted to find that out because you were doing researching on the effectiveness of various techniques for polling, and you really wanted to figure that out. So a thing that you would obviously want to find out is just like how often that happens. Like, what are the numbers? You can use numbers to prove your points, right? Statistics, studies, things like that. I'm not going to get into like maybe inflation was the wrong word because Lawrence just went off. And then of course I went off, and then we ended up here. And
well, I honestly thought we were just
off
going to use the
topic,
death
so.
penalty example, but
Okay, I mean, like we could use the death penalty example if we want to be like death penalty increases crime, decreases crime, and I could just like try and think about that really hard. But like really, the way you want to do that is by looking at studies and statistics, right?
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like
so
I mean, like I have anecdotal evidences. Like maybe I heard this like one time where we executed a bunch of people and then suddenly people got scared and stopped doing stuff. But like really, in order to justify the statement that the death penalty increases/decreases crime, you need to cite studies that are about this.
I definitely want to pick up on something that you said was actually super important. So when you're debating someone in real life, anecdotal, aka related personal experience stories, are really effective in like interpersonal debates, right? If I'm just like talking to my mom, I'll be like, oh, I saw little Joey do this or something like that. That was a bad example, but little Joey exists now, and I love him. But anecdotal evidence in like debate, in formal debate in high school, competitive debate doesn't fly, right? Like the example you use, like, hey, I watched this guy get killed, like I'm so deterred. Like I obviously could not bring that up in a conversation and like expect to win, right?
Well, assuming your opponent at all bothers to point this out, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, of course, anything flies if your opponent just completely ignores your point. But if your opponent is like, hey, that doesn't prove anything, and I have this other warrant, your argument just falls instantly, right?
Right, and we'll talk about comparing warrants on a separate podcast. We also did an evidence comparison episode, if I remember correctly.
We did do an evidence comparison podcast. That was a good episode. I really loved it. So we have studies and statistics. And another thing that you mentioned was qualified authority. So Lawrence, I kind of made fun of this, the use of the word qualified, by suggesting that it had an alternate meaning. Hilarious, I know. But what is a qualified authority, and how is this different from the studies and statistics things? Like, why should I like how would I know that they're different?
So, in a world in which high schoolers just argue with each other and cite no one other than themselves, the best you have is some high schoolers yelling at each other who, as we all know, are not the most knowledgeable people in the world. And actually, for some of you, might be middle schoolers. So, in order to sort of get a better, well thought out, more informed opinion about things, you want to cite people who are, and I'll use the phrase again, experts in their field, who are qualified by virtue of, some degree from a university or experience in the field, or because they are also citing some person who's better than they are, so like, news article, but somewhere where like we are in relative consensus that this person is, informed and educated and qualified to make a statement or a judgment about something that, most high schoolers would not be able to. And I think a good example of this is sort of like the field of philosophy, for instance. While there is no such thing as like a philosophical study other than, well, no, I really don't think there is one to determine which philosophy
I thought
is true.
about it a lot. Trust me.
I guess like the closest you could get is to like a survey of like all the philosophers and their differing philosophical views. Like I think 37, like we have studies that shows that 35% of people are like actual utilitarians or something like that. But like other like
Oh, wow.
you can just, I guess, cite a bunch of things. Like a high schooler could come up with the same conclusion, I guess, as a philosopher, but we wouldn't really trust the high schooler because they don't have as much experience or education or, like other people to approve their thoughts before it gets published. So we would trust someone who's more qualified than them, like a actual tenured professor at an institution, like a university, to make an argument because they are much more qualified to make it.
Right. And so obviously qualifications are super important for your studies and statistics. So so one thing that I'd like you to sort of file away, people who are paying attention to types of warrants, is that establishing that you have a qualified authority is a good thing in favor of your study. But even if your person wasn't super qualified, like the fact you have a statistic is still a warrant, right? Even though it's not like as good of a warrant.
Well, I mean, in some instances, I definitely prefer the statistic over the sort of qualified authority. I mean, qualified authorities bicker over empirical points or, actual points that we could study all the time, like whether or not the death penalty increases crime. And they just cite a bunch of, like, well, I think logically for this reason, some person says, and some other person who's also qualified says, I think logically for this reason, something else. And that's sort of hard to resolve. And so in that instance, I definitely prefer a study that is like, we looked at this, state that had the death penalty for 50 years and analyzed crime trends and was like, oh, it actually does increase/decrease crime.
And that's an important point that you bring up, and that has sort of been present throughout the last couple times I've talked to you. And that's so here is the difference between a study and statistic warrant and a qualified authority warrant. Having a qualified authority for your studies and statistic is good, but if you want to have I told you, remember that it's an entire different type of warrant too. And I kind of want to make sure that those things are different. A qualified authority, as Lawrence said, as a standalone warrant, is just that you should believe something, even without an explicit reason, because someone said it. So, for example, you kind of hear and read this all the time. You hear someone's like, "This Harvard professor said that death penalty increases crime," right? And the point is that that's not a very strong point. It's not a very strong argument, but it is an argument, right? It is a type of warrant, Lawrence, isn't it? I mean, me knowing that some Harvard economics professor believes that the death penalty increases crime, that might make me more likely to think that it does than not, right? It is a reason, even if it's not a great one.
Yeah, I agree. It is a reason.
So it is a type of warrant. Now, obviously, qualified authorities and statistics go hand in hand because usually the people doing the statistics are qualified authorities, and it's important to combine those two. But it is important that you can establish a reason for something rooted in two different things. Okay, now you sort of talked about the academic discipline of philosophy, Lawrence, and that's kind of where we're going here. I'm going to give you a different, very easy argument, and I want you to tell me whether it's true using a statistic. Okay, the argument is 2 + 2 = 4.
Well, I can confirm with great knowledge by typing 2 + 2 = 4 into the Google calculator. And it will, in fact, confirm that 2 + 2 = 4. And I trust Google Calculator a lot. So I can, in fact, use some empirical basis. I have some.
I did ask for a study in statistic, though, 0 out of 1.
Okay,
0%.
so I could probably Google a study about this, but I don't
A
really
study
want to.
about two plus two equals four.
I,
That will involve statistics and stuff. Just like
yeah, probably. Why
an
not?
experiment. Like we did did an experiment. We had two apples. We threw two more on and then we counted them and it turned out to be four. That would be the biggest waste of money ever. So now of course I'm playing with Lawrence here. We obviously know that 2 plus 2 equals 4, not because of statistics, right?
Yeah, I mean, most likely. At least I hope not. You would use your own reasoning process or logic to sort of figure this one out for yourself.
Right, and so the general idea is for 2 plus 2 equals 4, and correct me if I'm wrong at any point, Lawrence, but the general idea is if you know what all of those terms mean, then you just know already that they're accurate. So, for example, if you know what the word 2 means, if you know what the sign plus means, if you know what the sign equals means, and if you know what 4 means, then those sentences should just say the same thing.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you can also use logic for other arguments as well. Like even on the death penalty example, I guess you could just use logic, which is like, I think the death penalty would deter crime, logically speaking, because people don't want to die, so they wouldn't commit crimes that would get them killed. And it's not the best. It's much better to have a study. It's much better to have like a professor make this argument, or like a social scientist or like a researcher make this argument. But I mean, that doesn't make it not an argument. If you just simply said this yourself, it would just make it like not the best argument.
Exactly. And the point is this is debate, and you can use your own reasoning process to prove whatever it is that you want. But one important thing that obviously that we all have to realize is that some things, though, you can't prove with statistics. Some things you can only prove with logic. You can use logic to prove a lot of different things. But you can't use statistics to prove everything. So, for example, Lawrence, if I said, all right, I want a statistic for the following statement: murder is immoral.
Yeah, I mean, there's no like real way to prove that, with a study that murder is immoral.
And you the point is there are all sorts of studies that you can use to prove that murder causes all sorts of bad things. But philosophy, and this is one of the key things about LD, philosophy is the sort of thing that you need a logic for, right?
Yeah, mostly just logic, or logic from a qualified authority.
Right, exactly. And but remember, qualified authority, and this is an important point, Lawrence, means different things for different divisions. Like if someone is like a great economist, then I wouldn't necessarily trust them on morality necessarily, right? Like
Right.
obviously qualified authorities are different. So just a quick recap before we go for a little break. About the types of things that we've described. So we've gone through claim, which is the overall argument you're making. We've gone over warrant, and we've gone over 3 different ways of warranting things. We've gone over, you can use studies and statistics to prove claims about the real world. You can use qualified authorities to do the same thing. And you can use logic to prove things, either about the real world or about philosophy, especially. So when we did I miss anything, Lawrence?
No, I think we got everything there.
So when we get back from the next segment, we're going to talk about Lincoln-Douglas debate specifically, now that we already have a good background in debate generally, and then we're going to talk about what an LD round is, etc. All right, so the type of podcast that we're about is a Lincoln-Douglas debate podcast, and our longtime listeners will obviously be aware of what Lincoln-Douglas debate is. So, Lawrence, where does the term Lincoln-Douglas debate come from? Who were involved in those debates, and do their names begin with an L and a D?
Surprisingly, yes. So this comes from the Lincoln-Douglas debates of a long time ago. Let me see if I have the year pulled up here.
I think it was
1858.
1978. Oh, I guess I was.
Okay. So they are also known as the Great Debates of 1858. It was between, of course, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, and they had, I believe, 7 debates over the subject of slavery. And what made this debate interesting of the time is that it wasn't really a debate over like, is slavery economically profitable or things like that. It was just a question of, is slavery at all valuable? Is slavery at all, like something worth keeping around? Is it morally justifiable? And that's what made it different from all those other debates, because all the other debates at the time were all just like empirical questions, basically. They're just two academics who'd have their two competing assertions about some topic that we could confirm with a study, and they just sort of debate about it. But this was really the first debate that talked about sort of the moral quality of an action, and that's what made it different.
Right. It was values questions it's centered on value questions, for sure. Who won?
Well, I think it's relatively easy to figure out.
It was a tie.
Oh, actually, I'm not even sure. I'm pretty sure that Lincoln won, but I can't be entirely
he
sure.
He won the battle of history, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the issue was
it was a debate for Senate, right?
Right, because it wasn't a debate for like the presidency. But I actually think
Lincoln
that
won, right?
No, I think what it says here on Wikipedia, which is always the most trusted of news sources, that Stephen Douglas was reelected by the legislature, even though Lincoln's Republicans won the popular vote.
Oh no!
And so I think actually, if I remember correctly, it wasn't Lincoln that won; it was Douglas who won. But the coverage of the debates actually raised Lincoln's national profile, which is why he, got to run for presidency and obviously win it.
So this is one of those lose the battle, win the war things.
Yeah, because
which, by the way, you're going to be doing a lot of as a novice.
Yeah, I agree.
You're going to be losing some battles to win some wars. Gonna be a lot of that. So okay. So what makes it unique? So the first thing that Lawrence just mentioned, the values debate. I've been talking about philosophy for a reason. In Lincoln Douglas debate, you have debates about philosophy, and we'll get into that later. And of course, we can go into other topics. There are other podcast episodes that we have that more in-depth discuss the sort of philosophical aspect of Lincoln Douglas debate. But Lincoln Douglas debate does have a philosophical aspect, and that's one of the key points of the whole enterprise. Now, we have values questions for policy issues, though. Most of our topics are not just like killing one to save many is wrong, right? I mean, I know there was one topic that I debated that was that, but basically every other topic has been like value question, aka is it moral to, or we ought to do blank for a policy issue. So for example, this resolution is it's compulsory to have we should have compulsory national service. It is moral to have compulsory national service. So, Lawrence, can you think of many resolutions that were not policy questions? I know I can think of one only, maybe two
that we've actually debated or that have been proposed.
That we've debated. I guess there was another topic that was like helping others is good.
Yeah, so those like individuals have a moral obligation to assist those in need.
Yeah.
There was like the nationals topic, which was like inaction in the face of injustice is like makes one morally culpable. I don't know the exact wording, but that wasn't a policy question. It's just like a moral judgment. There's like a topic that was proposed, which was like the bombing of Hiroshima was immoral. But by and large, the rest of these questions do and have to, in fact, do with government policies. So like national service or, constitutional issues concerning free speech or the production of nuclear power or, police reform in the criminal justice system or, a bunch of other things that you'll be debating eventually.
Right. But so I think what that demonstrates is like, look, the core of Lincoln Douglas debate is kind of a lot of the philosophy stuff in the sense that you can't have a resolution that is just a policy question. I can think of no resolutions that have had no morality relevance at all, or justice, of course, or, any other values. But there are some resolutions which just, there's some resolutions that just deal with the value question. Most deal with both.
Yeah.
So you're taking a value stance on a policy issue. So it wouldn't just be like the death penalty decreases crime. It would be like the death penalty is moral. And of course, you can answer that question with reference to crime and things like that. But You don't have to. So the other thing that makes it unique, Lincoln Douglas debate, is kind of a formatting thing, right? Lincoln Douglas debate's one-on-one. It's in fact, I think, the only debate event that we have that's one-on-one.
Yeah, because the next closest thing we have is Congress, which is one-on-one on one-on-one on one-on-one on one, and then like so on and so forth.
Yeah, congressional debate is like a free for all. You have like 1v20 in like 4-hour periods or something, and the other types of debate is public forum debate, which is 2-on-2, policy debate, which is 2-on-2.
And
Lincoln
big
Douglas
questions debate.
Is big questions debate 2-on-2?
I think it's like 3-on-3, or maybe it's just I have no idea. And then
I know like all the random parley forums have like 2 or 3 people.
And then World School Debate is also 3. But Lincoln Douglas is in fact the only one-on-one debate that we currently have as a competitive high school debate event.
Right. So one of the reasons that I know that a bunch of people that go into LD when it's just them at a school is like they like don't want to work with a partner, or they like don't have one. So for some people it's kind of like a marriage of convenience. And if that's you, that's totally fine. And you lucked out because Lincoln Douglas debate is great. So let's talk details. Speech times. So how many speeches are in Lincoln Douglas debate, excluding question and answer periods?
Well, there are 5 speeches in Lincoln Douglas debate, which is strange. Right? Yeah, because it's strange because there's 2 debaters.
So that is an odd number of speeches, and by that I mean it is odd number of speeches.
Thanks for the clarification.
You're welcome. So clear. So the speech times. So a couple things to help you remember this by. You have 13 minutes total to speak in a debate. But when you are, one side has 3 speeches, on one side has 2 speeches. So they're divided differently depending on your side. But it all adds up to 13. When you add up all the speech times in a debate, and we'll go through that later, you're about 40 minutes in a debate. So any given debate round, given round is what we call debates. Any given debate round will last about 40 minutes for speaking, and then a combined 5 minutes for just getting in and getting all your paper set up and stuff like that. So 45 minutes usually per debate. Another thing to help you remember the speeches, here's the thing about LD speeches, they kind of don't really make sense if you just stare at the numbers. The numbers are just very strange. You kind of have to memorize them. One little trick to help you out, though, is if you are speaking, times are descending in length. And by that I mean, if you give a speech, the next one you give will be shorter, whatever side you are. Every speech you give will be shorter. Okay, so Lawrence, do you want to just give us a quick rundown, not of speech names, but kind of times?
Yeah, so only talking about the times in which a debater is speaking, there are 5 speeches, and they go like this. The first speech is 6 minutes long. The second speech is 7 minutes long. The third speech.
So to be clear, at least though, they are alternating. So who speaks first?
Well, the affirmative, or the person defending the resolution that's given, is speaking first.
Okay, and then they just trade off every time, right? So who gives the next speech?
So the next speech was given by the negative, or the person who is supposed to refute or respond to the things the affirmative has said, and they speak second, giving a 7-minute speech.
So 6, then 7.
Yes. Okay. And then the affirmative gets to respond to the arguments presented by the negative in their previous speech, and the affirmative only gets a 4-minute speech after that.
4 minutes. Okay, so we go from 6 to 4 from the affirmative's perspective. You give a 6-minute speech, you wait a bit for the negative to speak, you give a 4-minute speech.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we have the negative who speaks again, and they give a 6-minute speech, which, as you'll point out, is in fact less than 7. Which I don't have a study to prove, but
No studies to prove, but you have your amazing logic skills, right? That can help you out there.
I believe my logic is in this case sound. And then the affirmative giving a speech after that, which means that the affirmative gives 3 total speeches. They give a 3-minute speech.
So affirmative 6, 4, 3, and then the negative 7, 6.
Yes. So it is
7 plus 6 is what, Lawrence?
13, I believe.
How about 6 plus 4 plus 3?
I believe that is 13.
That is also 13. You're
Ooh.
so smart. Um, I hope all of you at home were following along with that intense mathematics. If you have any questions about whether or not 7 plus 6 does in fact equal 13, send an email to the argument clinic podcast at gmail.com with all of your mathematical proofs. So from the perspective of, the whole debate, it sounds kind of weird, right? You have a 6-minute speech, a 7-minute speech, right? It goes up and then it goes down to 4. Then it goes up to 6 and down to 3. But the way that you should think about it is like this. The affirmative has 3 speeches. They go 6, 4, 3. And in the middle of those speeches, you have a 7-minute speech and a 6-minute speech. They are descending. Negative speeches are descending, add speeches are descending. Memorize those times, though. 6, 4, and 3 for the affirmative, and 7 and 6 for the negative. Now, there are 2 other things in addition to those speeches, and those speeches, by the way, I believe they total 26. Is that right? It's 13 plus 13, 26?
Yes, it is.
Math checks out. So the rest of, we said that a debate was 40 minutes. So where are the other 14 minutes?
So the other 14 minutes comes from 2 separate things. The first one is the cross-examination period. And that...
So like in court, right? Cross-examination.
Yeah. I thought you were going to make some other joke about like crosses and Christianity and examination like an eye examination, but it's better.
That's a good idea. I can't believe I didn't do that. You're so smart.
I'm so glad I preempted that. Okay, so cross-examination, like they have in procedural court, like procedural law dramas like Law and Order, is when generally in a courtroom, like the attorney will question a witness. And so just like that happens in those crime shows or those law shows, you get to do the exact same thing here, except for you're not really an attorney and that they're not really a witness. It's just a question and answer period. And so each debater gets 3 minutes to ask the other debater questions immediately following the first 2 speeches. So the affirmative will give their first speech, which is 6 minutes long, which the negative then immediately following that speech gets 3 minutes of cross-examination or question and answer time to question the affirmative about their affirmative, the affirmative about the arguments they presented. And after the negative gives their first speech, which is the 7-minute speech, the affirmative also gets 3 minutes to cross-examine, interrogate, intimidate. Don't do the last one. To question the negative about the arguments that they've presented, and that adds another 6 minutes to the debate.
There's probably like a little bit of that, right?
Hopefully not too much. Anyways, that is
not too much, right?
It's another 6 minutes to the debate, so I think we are now at 32 minutes.
So a couple just quick things about cross-examination, kind of like what it is. One important thing to notice is that cross-examination, based on what you said, Lawrence, I'd be able to figure out. Cross-examination is one direction, right? One person is asking questions, another person is answering them, like in court.
Yes.
And that is unlike some other debate events where there's more of a back and forth deal.
Yeah, so it's not an open
one way.
Yeah, it's not open question and answer period. It is entirely directed, where after the affirmative gives their first speech, the negative is the one who asks the questions to the affirmative. And after the negative's first speech, the affirmative is the one that asks the questions to the negative. But unless you're really, really bad at cross-examination, it stays that way.
Right. And I mean, like, the basic idea, right, is that like someone talks and then afterwards you ask them questions, and that happens twice. It's just like someone gets questioned about their speech, the like main part of their speech happens for the first couple speeches. So if we were building a timeline for the debate, it would be 6-minute affirmative speech, then 3 minutes of cross-examination, then it would be 7-minute negative speech, 3 minutes of cross-examination, then 4-minute affirmative speech, 6-minute negative speech, 3-minute affirmative speech. I don't expect you to have all those times memorized by now if this is the first time that you're hearing them, but it is something that you should eventually, of course, become familiar with over time. It may take you a couple tournaments to get the hang of it, but you eventually will, no doubt. So, Lawrence, where does the last 8 minutes, I believe, come in?
Yeah, so thankfully, despite the fact that you have to do research before this tournament, like we talked about earlier, we don't expect you to be able to make arguments just on the spot. It's going to take you a little bit of time before each speech to sort of think about what you're going to say and to organize what you're going to say. And just like during academic debates that you might witness, so for example, congressional debates, people will take time in between their speeches to collect their thoughts and to organize them. And so we also provide time for debaters in a competitive debate round to sit down and organize their thoughts and prepare for their speeches. And this is what we would call prep time or preparation time. And each debater gets 4 minutes of preparation time to be used at their discretion in between their speeches or before their speeches, so that they can use that time to prepare for the speeches that they're about to give. And so when you add 4 minutes for each debater, now we have 8 more minutes. 32 plus 8 gets us to a full 40 minutes.
Wow, thank heaven for prep time. Like, if preparation time didn't exist, debate would be so unbelievably hard. I mean, like, it is still pretty hard, but like, obviously it would be like impossible if you had no time to prepare.
Right. And it's just like an unreasonable expectation, especially for people who've never done debate before, to just expect them to have everything either prepared already or just to be able to think of all of the arguments on the spot. That's so silly. You can't do that. So you have to give them time to think and to organize and to prepare.
Important note, though, preparation times are set by the tournament, right? They're set by the rules of the particular tournament. So sometimes different tournaments have weird prep times. Like sometimes they're mean and only give you 3 minutes, and sometimes they give you more, like 5. But the vast majority of the time it's 4, though.
Yeah, that's the prep time that is allotted to you by the National Speech and Debate Association, which is generally considered to be the sort of governing body of all things competitive speech and debate in the nation.
Exactly. And debate would be so unbelievably hard without preparation time. You aren't expected to be able to completely come up with things on the spot. Although we have already said that. Okay, so let's talk about what happens in the speeches, and then we're going to talk about what a case looks like, and then we're going to wrap up. So, what happens in the speeches, as well as what they're called. These are some words that you should know. You should know what the speeches are called. So, the first speech is called the affirmative constructive speech, or AAC. It's constructive in the sense that you read what's called a case. And a case, and we're going to talk about cases in a minute, a case is just a statement of your position. This statement should be pre-written entirely. You can spend time writing it all out ahead of time. Type it all out, print it ahead of the tournament. So the affirmative constructive speech, where you present your case, why you should affirm the resolution, correct me if I'm wrong, Lawrence, that should be completely pre-written, which means that this speech, this AC speech, should not be difficult. It's literally just reading off a piece of paper, right?
Well, I mean, it might be difficult if you're not good at public speaking, but then you're in for a bad surprise for the rest of the debate. So,
right. So, like, obviously, when people are starting out, you can stumble on just reading straight up, but there's no thinking involved, right? The thinking was ahead of time. You already thought about what you're going to put in your case. You wrote it down. This is just reading it.
Yes. So hopefully the easiest speech in the debate, because you literally have it all written out.
Hopefully. Now, the next speech I'm calling the 1N. And the 1N is very interesting in the sense that in the 1N you have 2 jobs. What are they, Lawrence?
So the first part is to read a constructive, just like the affirmative has done for 6 minutes in the previous speech. And so the 1N will read a constructive. But certainly you can't just read a constructive. And there's a reason for why your speech is 7 minutes long, which is longer than the affirmative's original speech. Surely they don't expect you to just read a 7-minute constructive. So you, in addition to reading a constructive or your own negative case, which is just generally a reason for why the resolution is wrong, you also have to take the time to respond or refute or make arguments against the affirmative's case. So you're doing double duty in that you have to read a negative case and also respond to the affirmatives.
So that means that normally the negative case is shorter than the affirmative case, right? Because if it was just a 6-minute negative case, then you would only have 1 minute to attack their case, and that doesn't sound very feasible.
No, nor that wise. So
Nor wise, right? So the point is, you can set the negative case to be as long as you want. This is actually the interesting thing. You have a choice. You can choose how much time to spend. If you can spend 4 minutes reading a negative case, or 3 minutes, or 3 minutes and 30 seconds, or 2 minutes and 30 seconds, or 5 minutes, or 5 minutes and 30 seconds. The point is, you have a huge amount of latitude. And obviously, just like in anything in debate, there are some answers that are more right than others in terms of how much time you should spend. But it is up to you, right? You divide them however you want. You do have to divide them, though, right? You can't just pick one of those.
For the purposes of novice, no,
Right.
you cannot divide, or you cannot just pick one. You have to, in fact, choose to do both.
Yeah, it's very infeasible, I would say, to try to do to try to do the other stuff. Try to divide your time in a sane manner, and if you don't know how to divide your time, try and divide it 3:30 and 3:30. You know, you give your one end, it's 3 minutes 30 seconds. Then you attack the affirmative case, it's 3 minutes 30 seconds. The alternative is just to write a negative case, see how long that is, and then just read, make sure it's not too long, like make sure it's not 6 minutes, but as long as it's like shorter than that, time it ahead of time. You go into your speech, you read that, and then you address the affirmative case.
Yep.
So then there's the first affirmative rebuttal,
Or the
or
1AR,
1AR.
or
So
the assault rifle, the first assault rifle.
probably the first assault rifle would be a bad name for a speech, but I mean there are probably worse names for a speech than first assault rifle.
Yeah.
So so Lawrence, I'm going to ask you to prognosticate here, which is an interesting word that I believe exists, but I'm not sure. Prognosticate. So is there a second assault rifle?
In fact, there is, because there are 3 total affirmative speeches, and we're only on speech number 2.
There we go. That's math right there, all the statistics. So we have the first affirmative rebuttal. We call them the 1AR. It's much more efficient to refer to them by kind of their name, their like official designation. So you have AC, 1N, and sometimes people will call them different things. Sometimes people will call them the 1AC, which is kind of redundant, but of course you can still say, because I guess there only is one, so you can say one if you really want. For the negative speech, they have all sorts of names. You can call it the 1N, which I do to simplify things, but you can also say the 1NR or the 1NC or whatever. The important point, though, is that you can use the number to keep track of kind of what speech you're on. So we have, and so you have the numbers and the letters. So R stands for rebuttal, right, Lawrence?
Yes. First
So
affirmative rebuttal.
what happens in the first affirmative rebuttal? What all does the affirmative have to do?
So the
2 things,
affirmative
right?
has to do, yeah, 2 things. So they have to respond to the negatives constructive that the negative read in their previous 7-minute speech, but they also have to extend or carry through or defend the case that they originally read in the first affirmative speech from the attacks that the negative has just made. And as you can tell, that's a pretty difficult task, because the negative had a 7-minute speech to read a well-developed position against the resolution, as well as spend some amount of time responding to your own affirmative case. And now you have to do double duty, the same double duty the negative just did, which is to defend your case and to respond to the negative's case, but in only 4 minutes, which tends to make the 1AR the sort of most difficult speech in debate, and the one that many novices will have trouble giving at first.
Huh, obviously there are some differing opinions on that, but the balance of opinions are definitely on your side. That the 1AR is a difficult speech because of the volume of things that it should address. Main thing though, right? You have your case. Your opponent has attacked it. Defend it as best you can. Attack the negative case as best you can. Like with the negative not like with the 1N, obviously you have to split your time, and you can decide how much time you want to spend on the affirmative case versus time on the negative case. And this is not a podcast where we're going to go into all of those details. We'll have other podcasts where we talk more about that. But the only thing that I'll say is that, in fact, the question of what time you spend where is the hard part, right? I mean, that is what this whole debate thing is really about, is, the choices you make about how much time you spent. So there's no one answer that I can give you. Just, defend your case, attack the opponent's case, hope that it works out. That's what we're doing, right?
Just hope.
Well, hopefully more than hope, but yes, definitely there's hope involved. So the 2N. So the 2N has to do some stuff that the 1AR has to do, of course. It also has to do one other thing. And so why don't you walk through what happens in a 2N?
So a typical second negative speech, or some might call it the negative rebuttal or some other names, but for all intents and purposes, the 2N, or the second negative speech, also has to do the same things that the 1AR did, which is that it needs to defend its own case, and it needs to continue to respond to the affirmative case. So those are the 2 things that you should already be familiar with. The third thing that it has to do, which no other speech has done yet, is to give a summation of the debate round, to make it very easy for the judge to understand the central arguments or main arguments that have been presented in this debate. So far, we just have probably a lot of arguments in this debate, because we've already had a 6-minute speech, a 7-minute speech, and a 4-minute speech, which is How much is that? 18 minutes of time or 17 minutes of time? I'm so bad at math. 6 plus 7 is 13 plus 4 is 17 minutes of speaking time. And that's a lot of time to develop some really strong arguments. And as the second negative speech goes on, there's even more time that's added. And so it becomes very difficult for judges to really grasp every single thing that has been said in this debate. So the second negative speech needs to sum up the round. And the debate word for this is called crystallize the debate round, and make it really clear for how this debate round, ultimately plays out.
Right. So crystallization, as in you take the various, random debris you have and turn them into diamonds, right?
Yeah.
To make
a difference formation, of course.
Yeah, like obviously that this is a visual metaphor, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to summarize the debate, as Lawrence said, put it all in one place for the judge. And we have an entire podcast on crystallization, don't we? Or do we not? I forget.
No, we have an episode on the 2AR, which focuses a lot on how to crystallize the affirmative.
Yeah, that's why I thought that we did. We have an entire podcast on the next speech, which is the second affirmative rebuttal, and that basically has to do all the same things that the negative had to do in the 2N, except your F, and it's the last speech, right?
Yeah, which I think sort of nicely ties in. The 2AR does the exact same thing, except usually the second negative speech, because it's 6 minutes long, does have time to really focus on defending its own case and again responding to the affirmative's case. But the 2AR, if you remember, is a 3-minute speech, which means you don't really have time to cover everything that was just said in those last 6 minutes. So generally the 2AR, or the second affirmative rebuttal, will spend more time trying to crystallize the round and really just sum up the basic main points of the debate.
Right, and obviously, if you have any more questions about that, you can listen to our episode about it. So, last section, and this one is really important. So thank you all who have lasted so long to this section. We hope that you have a good understanding of like what are the speeches in the debate, kind of like what debate is, etc. So, but what we're going to do now is we're just going to finish up. We're going to talk about what does a case look like. So you want to debate. Basically, all you need to debate is you need a case, and you need to be able to say arguments and rebuttals, and that's it. And the case stuff is the hard part. You gotta write that ahead of time. We are going to give you the format for how you would want to go about writing that. So first thing in the case is you say the resolution, right? Very first thing, you say I affirm / negate the resolution, depending on what side you are. That one's easy peasy, but you got to do it. Main reason you got to do it, the judge doesn't always know what the resolution is.
Which is true.
You got to tell them what it is. It also gives them a sense to sort of hear your voice. Your powerful or whatever voice. You say the resolution. It's a good introduction. So after you say the resolutions, now we get into the meat of things. So as Lawrence was saying earlier, when we were talking about, I asked him, how would you know? How would you prove that the death penalty was immoral? And Lawrence said, well, very first thing that you do, you got to make sure you know what the death penalty is. This is on the same token. These are definitions. Lawrence, talk to me about definitions and why they go in a case.
So the definitions don't always have to be read, but usually it's helpful if you do, because once again, the judge may not be aware of the topic that you are debating. But even if they are aware, they may not be aware of sort of the intricacies of the topic. And so, for example, on the current September-October topic that is proposed for us to debate, it's about national service. But what is national service? And this is like a tough question to answer, because some people, if you only knew this term national service in a broad sense, might think it's just the draft or military conscription. But there are other definitions out there that say that national service could be more than that, right? It could include AmeriCorps or Peace Corps. And so defining these very ambiguous terms helps to clarify how the debate will look in the end. Because if you're talking past each other, as we talked about earlier in this podcast, well, that doesn't make for a very good or productive debate, and certainly doesn't make for an interesting one as a judge. So having clear definitions that really set the stage for how the rest of the debate is going to play out is really powerful and really useful.
Right. It sets the stage for the debate, sets a clarification for the debate, everything that Lawrence just said. Okay, so Then we have what are called observations. Lawrence, we're not going to talk about this for very long, but my understanding of observations was that you take a definition that you have and you just kind of explain what it means in like a more concrete sense for the debate. So for example, if you were to have a definition of national service that said that national service is both the military draft and other random community service organizations, an observation is just that where you would tell them that it includes those other things, right? You would say national service is defined as like the draft plus other things, and then you would say observation, just pointing out, just observing that it does include those other things. So it's not just the draft. Is that the sort of thing that we're talking about with observations?
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be like a very reasonable definition of what an observation is.
Yeah, so those are observations. Observations are optional. Definitions are not. One thing about definitions, though, don't define every single word in the resolution. For example, there's no definition of United States that you should give. Everyone knows what the United States is. Some of the more important words like ought or national service and compulsory should certainly be defined, but don't define articles like is or anything like that. So don't worry about defining every single word, just the words that are kind of the central points of resolution that there might be some disagreement about. Okay. Now we get into the real meat of this. So we have two things, and these things are unique to Lincoln-Douglas debate, and we're going to talk about them in connection to each other. So we have what's called a value premise and a value criterion, as in values, as in, what are our American values? So we have a value premise and a value criterion. Okay, so Lawrence, what is a value premise?
Well, the value premise, I could just be circular and be like, a value is something that we find valuable. But a value premise is sort of the end thing that you want to achieve, right? And it's generally something that's directly related to the resolution, something that we hold in high esteem, and something that we think is worth pursuing or achieving. And so an example of a value premise might be morality. So in our example earlier about the death penalty, when we're asking, is the death penalty immoral, or resolve the death penalty is immoral, what we're really trying to ask is, does this sort of conform to what we think is moral or not? And so if we think it's moral or immoral, we need to ask, like, what does that mean, or what is that? And so we have a value premise of something that we're trying to achieve, which is the value of morality. Like if we don't achieve or strive for or pursue the value of morality, well, we can't really answer the question of whether or not the death penalty is moral or immoral. And so that's what the value premise is.
Right, and the value premise, right, connects directly to the resolution. I loved it when you said that, because that's the whole point. You're saying that the resolution provides us with a basis for thinking about what is the highest thing to achieve, like what is the ultimate impact that we're talking about. And the value premise is normally the philosophical ideal that is the highest there. What is the value criterion? And why do you need it? So criterion, by the way, is the singular of criteria. So if you say there are 3 criteria for this assignment or whatever, criterion just says there's one, and that's obviously important. So why do you need a criterion? Why can't you just go straight to the value premise? Just say, I'm just going to talk straight about why death penalty is immoral.
Right. So just like criteria are a set of conditions that must be fulfilled to sort of achieve something. So like the criteria for getting this job is that you must fulfill these conditions, like, have a college degree, etc. We need to answer the question of what is morality, and like, how do we be moral, and what does it mean to be moral? And so we need some conditions, or in this case, a singular condition, because it's just a criterion singular condition, that if fulfilled, achieved, maximized, or something, helps us determine how we get to the value premise. So when we have this value premise of morality, that's pretty vague. I think it sort of invites the question, well, what does it mean to be moral? And that's a good question. And that's the question that your criterion should be aiming to answer. How do we be moral? Well, one possible way is by, for example, like not violating liberty. So we can have a value criterion of protecting liberty. And that would answer the question of how to be moral, which is, how do you be moral? Well, you protect liberty. Or we can have another value criterion, for example, of like minimizing deaths. And so when you ask the question, well, how do we be moral? That criterion answers that question by saying, well, we minimize deaths.
Exactly. So the criterion gives you a specific like sort of demand, a certain thing that you should do, an action that you should take or shouldn't take in line with your premise, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's more specific. For those of you, by the way, that are teaching novices, and for you novices out there, this applies to you both. It's very difficult, usually for novices, to understand criterions on the first go, and it's okay if you don't have a complete knowledge of criterions. We just told you what they were, but even if people spend longer time telling you, this stuff is hard. It really is. Everyone understands that. And for those of you who are teaching novices, please go easy with them, go slow, and it's okay if even if you explain it to them a bunch of times that they don't get it. But the best way that I found to explain it is that your criterion is kind of like your personal philosophy for the debate. If someone was like, what is, you change your philosophy from debate to debate, like your other arguments, you have to warrant your philosophy in a Lincoln Douglas debate. And this is where it lives, right? You have a philosophy in your case, you want to prove the resolution, it's there in your criterion. If I said, what is your philosophy for this debate? That would be the answer to the question.
Right. So just like, you'd have to warrant for why the death penalty decreases crime, you would also need to warrant why protecting liberty or by minimizing deaths is sort of the best metric by which we evaluate if we are moral or not, or if we have fulfilled or attained or achieved the value premise. And so just like everything else requires a warrant, so too does your criterion.
Because obviously there's disagreement, right? Like philosophers don't really agree on anything. There's people that think that the most moral thing to do is to respect individual rights. There are people that think that the most moral thing to do is to just get as much happiness for the welfare of society as possible. There are some people that think that you have to, the most important thing is minimizing racism, and all those other things are secondary. So you have all these different people, and there's all these big schools of thought, right? And basically what you should be doing, and you should listen to one of our episodes on utilitarianism and deontology if you want to have some ideas of some specific philosophies. You can also look at our social contract episode that we put out. All these episodes are on soundcloud.com/the argument clinic podcast, I think. There might be some hyphens between those words there, but they're all on SoundCloud or iTunes or wherever you get your podcast episodes. But what you want to do is you want to prove your criterion accurate, and you kind of want to like get to one of these schools of thought. If you want, like, you are arguing that something is important. That's all that you're doing. You are doing it with a philosophy, but the point is you don't need to do that alone. You have thousands of years of philosophical tradition behind you to sort of back up some of the stuff that you're saying. And it can be a little daunting at first. This is a funny story, by the way, Lawrence. I don't know. Did I tell you that when I was as a novice, my first day as a novice, people were just trying to tell me what a criterion was for like 3 hours, and they could not tell me what it was. I would not have it.
Well, in fairness, I don't think I actually learned what a criterion was until like maybe my sophomore year of high school. So
yeah, well, I learned before then, but like not by much. And I remember thinking, so by the end of this like 3 hour session, that I still didn't know what one was. So but then they're like, you have to have a case tomorrow, and I'm like, I need a criterion. What is that? So then this one random debater from my school, who turned out not to be very good, was like, just make your criterion human dignity, which by the way is a criterion. And he was just like, just make it human dignity, you'll be fine. So I was like, excellent. So I just made my criterion human dignity, but I didn't warrant it, which was a huge mistake of mine. And so we had
right, because human dignity is just so obviously contentious. How dare you explain what human dignity is, but not warrant it?
Whoa, wait. You assume I explained what it was. I didn't.
Oh, well, how dare you assert that human dignity was valuable? How dare you? It's morally repugnant.
And that's the thing. We actually got into the debate the next day, and my opponent's first cross-ex question, what is human dignity? My response, I don't know. So yeah, don't be Martin in this scenario. Find out what criterions are ahead of time, and don't just read a random selection of words. But the point is, try and justify it to the best that you can. And it's okay if you go to some tournaments and you're not totally sold on how to justify criterions, because obviously justifying criterions is difficult. Otherwise philosophy would be easy, and it's not. But Criterions, your personal philosophy, specific method of action. How do you actually want to achieve justice, let's say? Justice is too big of a concept. How do you want to achieve justice? Well, fairness is maybe a good starting point. We could try making our institutions fair. Or, we could say, hey, the best thing to do for justice is to increase the efficiency of our justice system. That's the best for justice. So the point is, you have different ideas about what is best for justice, what's best for morality, and that is also a thing you will debate with your opponent about in a Lincoln Douglas debate. In addition to the policy question of the death penalty, you'll also just be debating about what's good and what's bad, which is why LD is such a really fun activity to do. Last thing, contentions. Contentions is just the rest of the arguments you have, right, Lawrence? I mean,
yeah, and those are the arguments that, people outside of Lincoln Douglas debate would be most familiar with, right? When you have a debate with someone in class about, the death penalty, the part that you usually don't have is like, the definitions and like this value and this value criterion and things like that. No one really thinks about that. Really, all people are doing is just like, well, I think the death penalty is immoral because, or like wrong because it denies people rights, or I think the death penalty is wrong because, or is good because it deters people from committing future crimes. And they just throw out these types of arguments, or the arguments that are most directly related to the topic. And these are the contentions that we're all familiar with. These are the arguments that we all sort of recognize and hear all the time.
Yeah, exactly. These are the main arguments you make in support of a resolution. I'm not going to repeat what Lawrence said. The main thing that I want to stress, though, about that is these things connect to your criterion, right, Lawrence?
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I think, filters in very well with the sort of impact stuff that we were talking about as part of an argument above. That when you have, a valid criterion of, say, for example, minimizing death, and your impact is that the death penalty causes more vacationing lemurs in hickory trees in July, if I remember correctly.
Wow, you nailed it.
Good
job.
Nails. And if we get that far back, we would say that this contention lacks an impact because it doesn't connect to our criterion. Our criterion says that the way that we are moral, or the way that we judge if an action or some concept like the death penalty is moral or immoral, is whether or not it reduces deaths. So if your argument is about vacationing lemurs, well, it has nothing to do with the value criterion of minimizing deaths. And so we would say this is an argument without an impact. It is not relevant in terms of the topic. It is not relevant in terms of your criterion.
Yes, exactly right. Impact to the criterion, very important. You have your contentions. You say the death penalty causes something. Here's my proof. Here's my warrant. Then you connect that to your criterion. That's your impact. You say, this is important because it connects directly to my criterion because of this reason. And then you have a nice little jumble. The point is, if you took one criterion and one contention and you just submitted those, that would be a correct argument, and it would prove the resolution. Without the criterion, you can't prove the resolution, because if the resolution says that the death penalty is immoral, you wouldn't prove that if you didn't talk about what morality was. You would just prove the death penalty is some other thing. So the point is, you say, okay, in order to answer the question, is the death penalty immoral? We need to figure out what, first, the important thing. We know it's morality. What is moral? Well, fairness is the most moral thing. And then we say, after that, now all I have to do is prove that the death penalty is unfair, or that it is fair. And then you say, all those things connected prove the resolution, true or false.
Right, and this applies regardless of whether you're affirmative or negative, and that even the shortened negative case, which is, as Martin mentioned, usually about 3 minutes and 30 seconds long, will contain all of these things as well. Maybe it doesn't read definitions because the affirmative already read them, so you don't need to restate the exact same ones again. But everything else, like the value premise, the value criterion, and contentions that relate back to your value criterion, stay the same on both sides.
Right, exactly. Okay, so that was the main section of the podcast. If you need clarification on any point, don't hesitate to send an email to the argumentclinicpodcast@gmail.com. We'll send you an explanation of any of the things that we talked about in writing, so that you can always look at it. When we come back, we're going to talk about we're going to have our conclusion segment. We're going to say some thank yous and have a fun little debate. Thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 12 of the Argument Clinic podcast. Reminder, and any correspondence should be directed to the Argument Clinic podcast at gmail.com, especially if you're wondering exactly why Lawrence makes different decisions from other judges in big groups. So if you're wondering about that, send an email. If you're wondering about anything that we said in the podcast, send an email. We have a Facebook page as well as a SoundCloud page. Following our SoundCloud page is probably the fastest way. You can get our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or most of the other podcast apps, because we have an RSS feed that links directly there. Thank you again to our sponsor, Victory Briefs. They are an excellent debate camp, and if at any point that you're considering looking for them for debate camp or for briefs or for debate news, go to victorybriefs.com as one of the many places on the internet, or you can just Google Victory Briefs and see what you come up with. We are on iTunes, which means you can leave an iTunes review if you really liked the episode. If this is your first Argument Clinic podcast episode, feel free to look at past episodes on our SoundCloud page or on iTunes or anywhere else. Okay.
One random plug, actually, is that Victory Briefs recently released 30 filmed modules from camp. And so if you are at all interested in learning about, some of the elective courses that were taught during camp, which are in a lot of ways very similar to Argument Clinic episodes, I recommend you check out their YouTube page. You can just Google Victory Briefs and find them, or their website, vbriefly.com, which also is a link to the modules playlist on YouTube.
I literally didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that and think that it's awesome.
Thanks. I think it's cool too, although I did have to wake up really early to film some of those modules, so boo-hoo for me.
Do all, that's so cool, especially if you're novices. Are there any that are specifically like about novices and stuff?
There's like a few ones like how to crystallize that might be for novices. There's also like some ones that are like intro to theory, responding to theory, things like that. There's like a wide variety of modules that are available. I have like a track, a 3-part series called Debating Traditionally on there that is kind of useful.
Okay, so that's actually a super important thing for you all. There's a ton of stuff on this page. I'm looking at it now that is like not very useful to you because they discuss advanced varsity concepts. However, there are a ton of really good lectures here that you can check out. And I know these people, they're super bright, which means that they are here to test. They are here to teach you things about debate. So if you want additional instruction, in addition to listening to our podcast, that is a great resource. Thanks for pointing that out, Lawrence. Okay, so let's have at the end of all our podcasts, the most important, really the only important segment of our podcast is the debate part, where I debate Lawrence on a random issue that I come up with and he does not know ahead of time, which means that he's forced to sort of think on the fly, as I am when I will come up with a topic. So the topic for today is Paisley ties are the best kind of tie.
What kind of ties?
Paisleys? You don't know what a Paisley tie is?
No.
You know the little like the like sort of ribbony pattern things? Wow, that was such a bad description. Just like Google image it. I can't believe you don't know what a Paisley tie is. Come on, dude.
Oh, those things? Okay. No, I'm going for solid black.
Or like solid blue. Black. Oh,
like
sorry,
solid colors.
Sorry, you all. I remember the actual topic that I wanted to talk about. That other tie topic was bad. Okay, better topic. The topic that I actually wanted to talk about. I am going to go on this question. Okay. I'll just make the question. Have we already had a what's the best color podcast?
Or yeah, sorry, debate? I think so.
I think that we did. Oh man, I guess we'll have to go back to the tie one. All right. Okay. Paisley ties, best ties. Sorry about that.
I'm going with solid colors. I mean, it's like what you wear for a black tie event. Those patterns are distracting. That, to me, screams unprofessional and lack of style, especially the ones that pop up here immediately on Google Image. Like, some of these things have the worst color scheme and patterns I could imagine.
Some of them are really good, though. Look, I have a really good golden black one. That's excellent.
That there are a few good ones does not make the rest of the crowd suddenly disappear. There's so many bad ones here.
I think, but there are so many really bad solid color ties.
Okay, I'm going to narrow down my range. I'm going, instead of Paisley ties in general good, I'm only going for solid color, dark blue, black type ties.
Or just dark blue and black. I'm going to go for the con of that's dull.
I'd much rather be dull than these patterns, but I don't have strong opinions on this. So,
but you are admitting that you're dull.
Yeah, like personality-wise, face-wise, like all of the sort of wise. But I
Whoa.
mean,
Okay.
I I just can't imagine why the reason for wearing a tie would to proclaim I have no idea how colors and patterns work. Like it seems like the much better reason to wear a tie is like I know how to be like subtle, classy, subdued, not necessarily the most flashy and outrageous pattern you could find.
Well, a lot of these aren't super flashy and outrageous, but obviously they actually help you demonstrate the harmony of multiple different types of colors with your outfit.
Hmm.
Do you just think people should only wear black at all times?
No, I'm just going for that it is net better to wear dark colored, single color ties as opposed to these things, monstrosities.
All right, so it doesn't look like we're gonna come to an agreement here because Lawrence is
Well,
is
I think my
is,
criterion
is
for
getting the upper hand.
establishing best is sort of application.
Most boring, right?
No. It's like most professional. I think that's the appropriate criterion by which to judge if a tie is good or not. Since ties are formal clothing, you don't wear them in less than formal settings usually. And even if you did, I can't imagine the paisley tie being that. So I think the good criterion here is professionalism. I think we clearly win, or I clearly win, because you would never wear these paisley ties.
Certainly not we though, because you're only one person, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, and so a single color tie is definitely better, and that is the last I'll have to say.
Professionalism. I'm going to go for interesting artistic expression. I think that professionalism isn't everything in life, and that you can look professional with a paisley tie, but you can do so while demonstrating artistic and creative mastery in ways that affirm your own individuality in life. So basically, Lawrence is boringness. Lawrence is boringness good for the economy, and I'm going for artistic expression key to your soul. So if you have any opinion on who won this debate, as usual, send an email to the argument clinic podcast at gmail.com. But anyway, that's this week's episode of the Argument Clinic. Thank you all for joining us. And as we sign off every week, stay frosty.
No, this isn't an argument.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. It's just contradiction.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It is not.